Have you ever found yourself unexpectedly falling for someone you thought you knew, only to realize your feelings were much deeper than you ever imagined? What happens when the person you're falling for seems completely out of reach, and you're left questioning everything you thought you understood about your relationship? In today's video, we'll dive into a story of love, confusion, and self-discovery that unfolds between two unlikely roommates. At first, everything seems simple. A young person moving into a new apartment, excited to start fresh. They meet their new roommate, a guy who appears to be perfectly straight. But as time goes on, the lines between friendship and something deeper begin to blur. As they spend more time together, the protagonist starts to notice little things, shared glances, a lingering touch, late-night conversations that feel too personal. It's the kind of connection you can't ignore, and it's starting to feel like something more than just a casual friendship. But here's the twist: the roommate has always been upfront about being straight, so what could all these signs mean? Are they just friendly gestures, or is there something deeper going on? And what does it all mean for the protagonist, who is trying to keep their feelings in check? In this video, you'll learn about the emotional rollercoaster of falling for someone you never expected to have feelings for, how to deal with confusing emotions, and why sometimes what we think is a straightforward relationship can end up challenging everything we believe. Stick around till the end for an unexpected turn that'll make you rethink everything you know about love and friendship. Welcome to our channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our weekly stories full of twists, drama, and unexpected endings. Let's dive into today's story, and don't forget to stay till the very end. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. The days passed, and the connection between the protagonist and their roommate deepened. What began as a simple, friendly living arrangement soon turned into something far more complex. The conversations that once felt like casual exchanges now seemed to carry an undercurrent of something unspoken. It wasn't just the late-night talks or shared meals, it was the way their presence seemed to fill up the room in a way that felt more intimate than it should. Every time the protagonist caught a glimpse of their roommate, there was a strange warmth that settled in their chest, something that hinted at more than just friendship. The protagonist tried to keep their feelings in check, but it wasn't easy. There were little moments, accidental touches when passing in the hallway, a glance that lingered just a bit too long, the way their roommate would listen intently, as if hanging on every word. Each time, the protagonist's heart raced. It was a mix of hope and confusion, a quiet ache that made them wonder, was there more to this friendship than they had initially thought? But then, there were those moments when the roommate would speak about their personal life, stories about girlfriends, dates, and past relationships. It was a reminder, loud and clear, that the roommate was straight, or at least that's what he had always said. For the protagonist, those moments felt like a punch to the gut, as if their hopefulness was nothing more than a fragile illusion. The confusion gnawed at them. Were they reading too much into things? Were the signs they were noticing just the result of wishful thinking? Every new day brought new questions, new doubts. The protagonist began to second-guess everything. Were they imagining these small gestures? Was their mind playing tricks on them? It felt like walking a tightrope, each step forward filled with uncertainty. There was this constant tug-of-war between wanting to hold on to the hope that there was something more and the harsh reality that they might be fooling themselves. They tried to talk to friends, to get some clarity, but everyone had different opinions. Some thought the roommate might be into them but was just afraid to act on it. Others suggested it was nothing but a friendship, and the protagonist was overthinking things. It only added to the chaos in their mind. The protagonist was left trying to make sense of it all, while the quiet moments between them and their roommate seemed to tell a different story, one that was more complicated than anything they had anticipated. And yet, there was a part of the protagonist that wanted to ignore the signs, to suppress the feelings and keep things as they were. The thought of confronting their roommate, of risking their friendship, was terrifying. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, to keep the feelings locked away. But as much as they tried, the connection between them continued to grow, and the protagonist couldn't help but wonder where this path would eventually lead. One evening, after yet another long day of awkwardly navigating their feelings, the protagonist found themselves sitting on the couch, lost in thought. Their roommate was across the room, scrolling through his phone, but there was something different about tonight. The space between them felt charged, heavy with the unspoken words that had been building up for weeks. It was then that the roommate spoke up, casually mentioning something about his past, about a girl he had recently started seeing. He was excited, almost proud, and his voice carried that familiar tone of someone who had just met someone special. The protagonist felt the familiar pang of disappointment, but this time it was sharper. There was no avoiding it anymore. The truth was right in front of them. Their roommate was, without a doubt, straight. But as the conversation continued, something shifted. The roommate, noticing the quiet in the room, glanced over and gave a soft, almost apologetic smile. "I hope that doesn't make things awkward," he said, not quite meeting the protagonist's eyes. The words hung in the air, and suddenly, the protagonist felt like they were on the edge of a precipice. The moment had arrived, the moment they had both feared but unknowingly walked toward. For a brief second, the protagonist wondered if they should just let the silence speak for itself, keep the feelings buried and never risk their friendship. But there was something inside them that couldn't stay silent anymore. "I'm not sure what's happening here," the protagonist said, the words coming out almost too fast, as if they couldn't stop themselves. "I don't know if I'm just imagining things, but I think I've been feeling something more. More than just friendship." The roommate's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, there was only silence between them. It felt like time slowed, the weight of the confession settling in the space around them. The protagonist couldn't take it back now. They had said it, and in doing so, they had exposed the vulnerability that had been eating at them for so long. The roommate shifted, looking at the floor, his fingers nervously tapping on his phone. It was clear he was trying to process what had just been said, but his expression remained unreadable. The tension was almost unbearable. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know. I never thought. I mean, you never said anything, and I've just assumed that. I thought we were just friends." His voice faltered, as if unsure of how to navigate the situation. The protagonist felt their hearts sink, but they couldn't help but feel a strange relief wash over them. The words were out, and even though they weren't the response they had hoped for, there was something honest about the moment. It wasn't easy, but it was real. The roommate wasn't going to pretend he felt something he didn't, and for all the pain that brought, the protagonist couldn't help but admire his sincerity. "I never wanted to make you uncomfortable," the roommate continued, his tone softening. "I've always appreciated our friendship, and I don't want things to be weird." The protagonist nodded, a mix of relief and disappointment flooding over them. They had braced themselves for this moment, but nothing could quite prepare them for the actual words. Still, there was something comforting in knowing that the truth was out. There was no more guessing, no more wondering. The air was clearer now, even if it wasn't the outcome they had hoped for. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't what they had imagined when they first moved in together. But the protagonist felt something shift inside them. There was a quiet sense of peace, knowing that they could move forward without the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging over them. For now, they could focus on their friendship, knowing that no matter what, they had been honest. And as the night wore on, the two roommates sat in silence for a while, neither knowing exactly what to say next. But in that silence, there was an understanding. Things might never be the same, but they were still there, still sharing the same space, still finding comfort in each other's presence. The protagonist realized, in that moment, that sometimes the hardest part wasn't confessing your feelings, it was learning how to live with the truth, whatever it may be. The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of calm and awkwardness. At first, the protagonist was unsure how to act around their roommate. The revelation had shifted everything, but it hadn't erased the bond they had built over the past few months. They both tried to return to the routine they had established, but something in the air had changed. It was as if the space between them was now more fragile, and every word, every glance, felt more significant. The roommate, ever the careful one, kept his distance. Not in a way that felt cold, but in a way that respected the new boundaries that had been drawn. He still laughed at the protagonist's jokes, still offered to make coffee in the mornings, but there was something softer in his approach, as if he was tiptoeing around an unspoken rule. The protagonist noticed it too, the way he hesitated before initiating a conversation, or how he made sure to keep his physical distance. It was clear that neither of them wanted to make things awkward, but the truth was, they were both walking on eggshells. For the protagonist, the confusion of the past few weeks began to settle into a new reality. They had come to terms with the fact that their roommate was straight. There was no more wondering, no more hoping. But that didn't mean the feelings disappeared. They were still there, buried deep inside, only now they were something the protagonist had to learn to manage. It was a quiet, constant ache, but it was manageable. Or so they thought. The more time they spent together, the more the protagonist realized something. The friendship they had was strong, but it was also a fragile thing. Every moment they spent together now felt like it was teetering on the edge of something more, something neither of them could quite define. They had both agreed that their friendship was worth preserving, but neither knew exactly how to make that work. How could they be close, still share those late-night conversations, but not cross any lines? How could they find that balance? One evening, after a long day of work, the protagonist sat down on the couch, the familiar weight of their feelings creeping back in. They glanced over at their roommate, who was sitting at the kitchen table, reading. It was a peaceful scene, one they had seen countless times before, but tonight it felt different. The protagonist felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to talk about what had been left unsaid, but they didn't know how. "Hey," the protagonist said quietly, breaking the silence, "do you think we can make this work? Like, with everything, with how things are now." The roommate looked up from his book, his expression thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "I mean, can we still be friends? Like, without it being weird?" The question hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. The protagonist wasn't sure if they wanted reassurance or if they just needed to hear that things wouldn't fall apart. The roommate leaned back in his chair, his eyes searching the protagonist's face. "I don't want things to be weird either. I really value what we have. I don't want you to feel like you can't talk to me. But I also know, things are different now." He paused, clearly trying to find the right words. "I guess it's going to take some time to adjust. But we can figure it out." The response was more than the protagonist had expected. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It wasn't the clear-cut reassurance they had hoped for, but it was something real. The truth was, both of them were in uncharted territory. They had to learn how to navigate this new dynamic, how to keep their friendship intact while also dealing with the complexities that came with their feelings. As the days passed, they slowly began to fall into a new rhythm. It wasn't without its bumps. There were moments when the protagonist caught themselves feeling something they knew they shouldn't, or when they sensed their roommate pulling away just a little too much. But those moments became less frequent. They learned to fill the silence with comfortable banter again, to enjoy each other's company without overthinking every word. The protagonist began to realize that the situation, though complicated, wasn't as impossible as it had seemed at first. It was going to take time, but they could still be close. They could still share their lives, just in a different way. They weren't erasing the past, but they were moving forward, finding new ways to connect. It was a slow process, and there were days when it felt like they were back at square one. But there were also moments, rare but meaningful, when it felt like things were falling into place. And through it all, the protagonist learned something important. Love wasn't just about being in a relationship. It was about understanding, respect, and the ability to adapt. They had fallen for their roommate, but that didn't mean everything was lost. In fact, it might have just been the beginning of something deeper, something that was still unfolding, day by day. Time passed, and with it, the quiet tension between the protagonist and their roommate seemed to ease, but the underlying emotions never fully went away. The protagonist had accepted their feelings for what they were, unrequited, yes, but real all the same. They had worked hard to find their footing again, to carve out a space where they could both breathe and continue their lives without the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. Still, there were moments when everything felt as though it might fall apart. One evening, the two of them sat on the couch together after a long day. The television was playing some random show in the background, but neither of them was paying attention. It was one of those rare nights when the silence didn't feel awkward. It felt like a pause, a brief moment of peace before life began again. But then, as if on cue, the roommate did something that made the air shift, just a little. He placed his hand on the protagonist's shoulder, just for a second, like he was trying to be reassuring, but it lingered. The touch was innocent enough, but it hit the protagonist in a way that was anything but. The feeling of warmth and safety they had come to rely on over the past months suddenly felt like it had a deeper weight to it. They tried to shrug off the surge of emotion, but it was impossible. That simple gesture sent a rush of feelings through them, feelings they thought they had learned to manage. "Are you okay?" the roommate asked, his voice soft and casual, but the concern in his eyes was evident. The protagonist nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired. It's been a long week." But inside, they were anything but okay. That small touch, that fleeting moment, made them feel like they were on the edge of something they couldn't quite name. It felt too close to what they had once hoped for, and now, it was almost painful to think about. What if they had misread everything again? What if this was another sign that their feelings were just a fleeting moment in the roommate's life, a passing thought they would forget as easily as it had come? The protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than they realized, but at the same time, they knew better than to hope for something that couldn't be. The roommate had made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't interested in anything beyond friendship, and the protagonist had accepted that. So why did it feel like everything was changing again? The next few days were filled with a strange mixture of normalcy and confusion. There were moments when they could laugh together as easily as they had before, but there were also moments when the protagonist would catch themselves glancing at the roommate, wondering if there was something more behind his smile or the way he said certain things. The lines were starting to blur again, and the protagonist wasn't sure what to make of it. One night, as they were cleaning up after dinner, the roommate suddenly turned to the protagonist. "I know this is going to sound weird, but I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice unusually serious. The protagonist froze, their hearts skipping a beat. "About what?" "I don't know, about us, I guess," the roommate replied, his brow furrowed as if he was struggling to find the right words. "I know we've both been trying to figure things out, but I've been wondering if maybe we're both just missing something. Like, maybe we're both just trying to hold on to something that's not there anymore." The words hung in the air, and the protagonist felt a chill run down their spine. It was as if everything had come to a head in that one moment, and now they had to confront it. Were they both really just holding on to a friendship that was no longer the same? Was that the truth, or was there something more, something that neither of them was willing to admit? The protagonist's mind raced. "Are you saying you don't want to be friends anymore?" they asked, their voice barely a whisper. The roommate sighed deeply, his eyes searching the protagonist's face. "No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think we need to figure out where we go from here. We can't keep pretending that everything is the same when it's not. You know." The protagonist nodded slowly, understanding but still unsure. They didn't want to lose their friendship, but they also didn't know how much longer they could keep pretending their feelings weren't there, simmering just below the surface. As the conversation stretched on, the protagonist realized that this was the turning point. They couldn't keep avoiding what was happening between them, even if it was painful. They didn't know where things would go from here, but they knew they couldn't keep living in this limbo, where everything was uncertain and unclear. And so, they made a decision, an unspoken agreement between the two of them, without any grand gestures or promises. They would take a step back, give each other space, and see where things landed. There were no easy answers, no guarantees that everything would turn out okay, but for the first time in weeks, the protagonist felt a sense of clarity. Sometimes, relationships, whether romantic or platonic, had to evolve. They couldn't stay frozen in time. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. The days that followed felt different. The silence between the protagonist and their roommate wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It wasn't full of tension either, but it was still there, a quiet acknowledgement of the change between them, the shift in their dynamic. It was a feeling the protagonist couldn't quite shake off, as if something was lingering, waiting to unfold. They gave each other space, but they also continued to share the little moments that had once made their friendship so special. The small conversations in the kitchen, the shared meals, the late-night chats about life, dreams, and everything in between. It wasn't the same as before, but it wasn't bad either. There was a quiet understanding between them now, one that didn't need to be spoken aloud. For the protagonist, time felt like it was moving slowly, each day stretching into the next. They had resolved to keep their feelings in check, but it wasn't easy. The more they tried to push them down, the more they seemed to surface. And yet, they couldn't help but wonder if they were starting to see something more, something subtle but undeniable. Their roommate wasn't acting any differently, but there was a warmth in his gestures now, a tenderness in his words that hadn't been there before. At times, it felt as though he was more aware of their emotions, as though he was trying to navigate the delicate space between them with more care. One evening, the two of them were sitting on the balcony, sipping tea, watching the sunset. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, the kind of evening that felt timeless. The conversation, as usual, drifted from topic to topic. The roommate was telling a funny story about something that had happened at work, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. But then, just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, the roommate turned to the protagonist, his face more serious than usual. "You know," he began, his voice gentle, "I've been thinking about what you said that night. About our friendship." The protagonist's heart skipped a beat. The words they had both tried to avoid now hung between them, like the unspoken truth they had danced around for weeks. "I've been thinking a lot too," the protagonist admitted, their voice soft. "I don't know if it's possible to go back to how things were, but I don't want to lose what we have." The roommate nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I don't either. I value what we have, more than I think I let on. But I also know it's not easy. It's complicated." The protagonist smiled faintly, feeling a sense of relief wash over them. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was honest. "Yeah, it's definitely complicated." For a long while, neither of them said anything, the air between them filled with the sounds of the evening. It was as if they were both waiting for something, some sign that would make everything clear. The protagonist didn't know what that sign was, but in that moment, they didn't feel as afraid of the unknown. There was a sense of peace in knowing that they had both faced the awkwardness, the confusion, and the pain, and come out the other side with a better understanding of each other. Then, unexpectedly, the roommate spoke again, his voice quieter this time, more tentative. "I don't know what this means for us, for our future. But maybe we don't need to figure it all out right now. Maybe we can just be." The simplicity of the words struck the protagonist. Just be. Maybe that was the answer they had been searching for all along. Maybe they didn't need to force an outcome, to decide whether this would be a friendship, something more, or nothing at all. Maybe the only thing that mattered was being present with each other, accepting the unknown, and allowing things to evolve naturally. For the first time in weeks, the protagonist felt a sense of calm. They didn't have to have everything figured out. They didn't need to define what this was, all they needed was to continue being in the moment, to be honest, and to allow whatever happened next to unfold in its own time. As the evening wore on, the two roommates fell into a comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. There were no grand declarations, no promises of what the future would hold. But in that moment, there was something more important than answers, a shared understanding, a quiet bond that was strong enough to carry them through the uncertainty. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As the days continued to pass, the protagonist and their roommate found a new kind of peace. Their relationship, once fraught with uncertainty and unspoken feelings, was now grounded in something more authentic, a deep understanding of each other. It wasn't the love story the protagonist had once dreamed of, but it was something just as valuable, a friendship that had weathered emotional turmoil, vulnerability, and change. It was proof that even when things don't go as planned, there is always room for growth, for new connections, and for discovering the unexpected. Their journey wasn't about finding all the answers at once. It was about embracing the complexities of life, letting go of expectations, and learning how to live in the moment. Sometimes, love isn't about being in a relationship. Sometimes, it's about finding peace in the things that remain steady, even in the face of change. As they moved forward, side by side, the protagonist realized that no matter where their paths would eventually lead, they had found something real and meaningful in each other's presence. And for now, that was enough. If you've enjoyed this emotional journey of love, friendship, and self-discovery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let's continue the conversation, and remember, sometimes the most unexpected bonds can change everything.